Hey everyone, welcome to this deep dive. And today we're going to be tackling Descartes' rules for the direction of the mind. Pretty cool stuff, and I'm excited to really get into it with you.
Yeah, it's a great text. I think it really speaks to this desire for certainty in a world where there's a lot of doubt, and that's something that resonates with us still today.
Absolutely. So to do this deep dive, we've got these awesome excerpts from Harold H. Joachim. He was this brilliant Oxford professor.
Right, and what makes this even cooler is the book was actually put together from his students' notes. So
Yeah.
it's almost like we're getting this like behind the scenes look at these lectures.
I love that. Yeah, so it's like we're uncovering some hidden philosophical treasure or something, right? So if we're going to unpack Descartes' method here, I think it makes sense to focus on a few key concepts.
Definitely.
We've got intuitus, deductio, and then enumeratio inductio. Those are some big words.
They are.
Oh, and we can't forget about Descartes' theory of vera mathesis. So universal mathematics.
Yeah, and it all starts with understanding how Descartes viewed this thing called the vis cognoscens, which is basically the power of knowing.
Okay, let's dive into that. What did Descartes actually believe about how we know things?
Well, for Descartes, knowing was something totally spiritual, completely separate from like our physical bodies.
Okay.
He thought that our senses and our imaginations and even our memories all play a role,
Right.
but they're kind of like the supporting cast.
Interesting. So not the stars of the show.
Nope, not at all.
Yeah.
The real star, the only faculty that can actually get at the truth for Descartes, was the intellect.
Okay, so the intellect is the lead role in this whole knowledge production.
Exactly. And he had this really fascinating idea about how our senses interact with the intellect. He imagined this thing called phantasia.
Fantasia.
Yeah, phantasia. It's like this part of the body where impressions from the senses get imprinted like a wax seal or something.
So it's like our senses give us the raw data and the intellect steps in to like interpret it. Yeah.
Exactly. It's actually a pretty insightful idea for the 17th century, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, doesn't that kind of downplay the role of our senses and experiences in shaping knowledge? I mean, how would Descartes address that?
Well, he'd probably say something like, our senses can be super deceptive.
Right.
Think about optical illusions.
Yeah,
Or how, like, your emotions can totally change how you see something.
totally.
So for Descartes, real knowledge had to be based on something unshakable, something that the intellect could grasp with absolute certainty.
Okay, that makes sense. And so that's why he was so fascinated by math, right?
Right.
Like math is the land of, black and white answers. There's proofs and it's very logical.
He was absolutely convinced that arithmetic and geometry held the key to unlocking true knowledge for everything.
Because in math, like 2 + 2 is always going to equal 4.
Exactly, no matter what.
Right. But it gets even more interesting because Descartes actually believed that even math as it was back then could be improved.
Yeah, he envisioned this like ideal science that he called universal mathematics or vera mathesis.
Okay, so break down this vera mathesis for me. What was that all about?
Imagine like a science of pure order and measure. It's a way of understanding the structure of everything, regardless of what the subject is.
So like the universal language of the universe, the code that makes everything tick.
Exactly. He believed that this vera mathesis would transcend the limitations of all these specific disciplines and offer a framework for understanding, like you said, everything, the motion of the planets, how the human mind works.
That's amazing. But how did he propose we go about discovering these universal principles? I mean, did he give us any examples of how vera mathesis would work in practice?
Well, that's where his method comes in.
Okay.
And at the heart of that method are two key concepts, intuitus and deductio.
So we've got intuitus. What about deductio? How does deductio fit in here?
So think of intuitus as that like aha moment.
Yeah.
You have like a flash of insight where you grasp a truth directly and you're totally certain about it.
Oh, I get it. So it's like when you finally understand a concept you've been struggling with and it all just clicks into place.
Exactly. And then deductio is the process of logically deriving new truths for the ones you've already grasped through intuitus, like building a house brick by brick.
So intuitus is the foundation, and then deductio helps you build the whole structure of knowledge, like step by logical step.
You got it. And for Descartes, both intuitus and deductio, when they're done right, are equally infallible.
Wow.
Each step in the reasoning process leads to a conclusion that's just as certain as where you started.
So Descartes has given us these really powerful tools for uncovering truth. I mean, think about like how you make decisions in your own life. You weigh the evidence, you think about the consequences, and then you arrive at a conclusion that's deductio.
Exactly.
Descartes just like formalized the whole process to help us find those unshakable truths. Okay, but what about that third concept, enumeratio attussive inductio? That one's a little more mysterious, right?
Yeah, it is. Even Joachim, whose work we're looking at here, admitted that it was kind of a head scratcher. It seems to have something to do with the limitations of the human mind when it comes to handling really long chains of reasoning or dealing with huge amounts of data.
So Descartes realized that our brains can get overloaded even with the best tools.
Exactly. And that's where numeratio inductio comes in. Descartes describes three basic scenarios where you might need it.
Okay, I'm curious to hear about those.
Well, the first one, imagine you're trying to solve a really complex Sudoku puzzle.
Okay.
You've got all the rules, but the puzzle's so intricate, it's really hard to keep track of all the possibilities and deductions.
Yeah, I can see how that'd be mentally taxing.
Right. The second scenario is like trying to understand a scientific theory that draws on knowledge from a bunch of different fields,
Yeah.
like physics, chemistry, and biology. All at the same time, you're constantly having to translate between all these different concepts and vocabularies.
Yeah, it'd be like speaking multiple languages at once.
Exactly. And the third one, think about like planning a massive project with a ton of moving parts and deadlines, keeping everything organized and making sure nothing falls through the cracks. That takes some serious mental organization.
So is enumerative inductio kind of like a mental trick for managing complexity?
I think it is, it's more like a way to organize and manage complex arguments.
Okay.
It's like a cognitive aid for proof, but not like a distinct type of proof itself.
So more like a scaffolding that supports the reasoning process.
I like that analogy a lot. It helps you break down these big problems to smaller chunks and make sure you don't lose anything in the process.
That's super helpful. We've covered a lot of ground already. The power of knowing, this idea of universal mathematics. But it seems like we're about to dive into even deeper philosophical territory. I'm ready when you are. All right, so let's dig into this idea of things that don't fit neatly into these simple categories. Like, where do we even begin with that?
It's a great question, and it's a problem that philosophers have been grappling with for centuries. Like, we often just assume that the world is made up of these basic building blocks,
Yeah.
kind of like a giant Lego set.
Yeah.
And to be fair to Descartes, he was very much a product of his time working within that framework.
Right.
But as we've been kind of hinting at, there are these aspects of experience that just resist being broken down into those neat, isolated parts.
Right. It's like trying to explain like the beauty of a symphony by just analyzing the individual notes or the vibrations of the instruments. You'd completely miss like the magic of the whole orchestra playing together.
Exactly, and that's where this this assumption that Descartes kind of implicitly makes this idea that the universe is ultimately composed of like simple elements and their relations starts to run into trouble.
Okay, so we're talking about things that have a kind of wholeness or unity that you can't get at just by like adding up the individual components.
Precisely, think about it this way. There are different kinds of unity that we encounter all the time, like wall-mated bricks, for example.
Right.
That's a simple aggregate. Each brick retains its individual properties, even though they're arranged to form this larger structure.
Right. So each part's kind of independent, contributing to the whole, but not really defined by it.
Right. And then you've got compounds like water,
Okay.
which is made up of distinct elements, hydrogen and oxygen, but the resulting substance has properties that are totally different from either of those elements on their own.
Yeah, water isn't just like hydrogen plus oxygen. It's something totally new with its own unique characteristics.
Exactly. Now, the real challenge for Descartes' method comes with a third type of unity, those concrete wholes where the parts are inseparable and they're actually defined by their relationship to the whole.
So like a living organism.
Exactly.
You can't really understand like a heart in isolation.
Yeah.
It only makes sense within the context of the whole circulatory system, and that's just one piece of the entire organism.
Exactly. Or think about a work of art trying to analyze a painting by just studying like each individual brushstroke would completely miss the point. It's the composition, the interplay of colors and forms that creates the beauty and meaning.
And what about those more abstract concepts we talked about earlier, like knowledge or beauty or goodness? Those seem even harder to break down into like simple parts.
Absolutely. They're not just like these free-floating ideas out there. They're intertwined with our experiences, our values, our understanding of the world. Descartes' emphasis on simple elements just doesn't quite capture those richer, more complex aspects of reality.
So if Descartes' method struggles to grasp these complexities, are there other approaches that might be more helpful? It seems like we need a different set of tools, a new way of looking at things.
Well, luckily, we're not the first ones to ask these questions.
Right.
Other philosophers have wrestled with these same challenges, and they've offered some alternative perspectives that both build upon and move beyond Descartes' ideas.
Okay, I'm ready to expand my philosophical horizons.
All right, well, let's start with Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. He
Okay.
was a contemporary of Descartes, and he offered a radically different way of understanding unity.
Okay, lead the way.
So instead of breaking things down into smaller and smaller pieces, Leibniz proposed that the fundamental units of reality are these things called monads.
Monads! Okay, that's a new one. What are those?
Imagine each monad as like a unique, self-contained world,
Okay.
reflecting the entire universe from its own perspective.
Whoa. So instead of a bottom-up approach where you build complexity from simple parts, Leibniz is saying that each individual entity already contains the richness of the whole.
You got it. And these monads aren't static or isolated either.
Right.
They're in constant dynamic interaction with each other, each one influencing and being influenced by every other monad.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how this is a very different way of thinking about reality. Instead of a universe made up of isolated building blocks, it's more like an interconnected web of perspectives.
Exactly. And that interconnectedness is key to how Leibniz understood unity and wholeness.
So we've got Descartes with his focus on clear and distinct ideas, and Leibniz with his monads, each reflecting the universe in its own unique way. Are there any other philosophical giants we should consult on this journey?
Yeah, let's fast forward a century or so to Immanuel Kant.
Okay.
Now, he was a real philosophical heavyweight. He grappled with the very nature of knowledge and experience, and unlike Descartes, who saw the mind as kind of passively receiving impressions from the world,
Right.
Kant argued that our minds actually play an active role in shaping what we perceive.
So we're not just like blank slates soaking up information, we're actively participating in the process of knowing.
Exactly. Kant believed that we have these innate forms of intuition, like space and time, and categories of understanding, like cause and effect.
Okay.
And these things actually structure how we make sense of the world.
So it's not just about what's out there in the world, but also about how our minds make sense of it. We bring our own framework, our own way of organizing and interpreting experience.
You got it. And for Kant, this was the key to understanding how knowledge is even possible. We're not just passively reflecting reality, we're actively constructing it through the lens of our own minds.
That's pretty mind-blowing. It's like we've gone from Descartes' quest for certainty in the external world to this idea that the structure of our own minds is just as important.
It's a really profound shift in perspective, and it's had a huge impact on philosophy and beyond.
I love how we're getting all these different philosophical lenses to view Descartes' ideas through. It's like each perspective adds a new layer of understanding, a new way of approaching this whole problem of knowledge and reality.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's that spirit of intellectual exploration that Descartes himself embodied his quest for certainty, even though it had its limitations, paved the way for this rich and ongoing dialogue about the nature of knowledge, the power of reason, and the complexities of human experience.
Speaking of ongoing dialogues, it feels like we've reached a natural stopping point for this part of our deep dive.
We ha-
I mean, we've explored the limitations of Descartes' method. We've delved into this intriguing world of Leibniz's monads. And we've even touched on Kant's revolutionary ideas about the mind's active role in shaping knowledge.
We have indeed covered a lot of ground. But don't worry, the journey's not over yet in our final part. We'll bring it all together, revisiting the key takeaways from Descartes' rules, and leaving you with some thought-provoking questions to ponder as you continue your own philosophical exploration.
Okay, so we're back, and wow, what a journey. It's been exploring the ins and outs of Descartes' philosophy.
It really has. We've dissected his method and challenged his assumptions and even traveled through some pretty wild alternative perspectives.
It's amazing, though, how these ideas, from centuries ago still have this power to, make us question and rethink how we understand the world and even ourselves.
I completely agree with you there. And before we officially wrap up this deep dive into Descartes' rules, I think it would be good to take a step back and revisit the key takeaways. Like, what were the big aha moments for you?
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, it all comes back to Descartes' just unwavering belief in the power of human reason.
Yeah.
Like he was so convinced that if we use our intellect correctly, we can achieve this level of certainty that goes way beyond our senses, which can be fleeting and sometimes even deceptive.
Exactly. And that's really where his emphasis on clear and distinct ideas comes in. He was all about getting rid of assumptions and biases and just getting down to the bedrock of truth.
Yeah, totally. And to help us do that, he gave us these two incredibly powerful tools, intuitus and deductio.
Right.
So intuitus being that direct grasp of a self-evident truth, and then deductio allowing us to build upon that truth through really careful logical reasoning.
It's almost like intuitus provides the spark, The initial flash of insight and then deductio fans that spark into this like bright flame, a chain of reasoning that illuminates the path to knowledge.
Yeah, I love that analogy. And even though Descartes really emphasized the importance of breaking things down into their simplest elements, he also recognized that our minds have limits. That's where enumerotio inductio comes in, right?
Right. It helps it to manage all that complexity and organize our thoughts when we're faced with those really intricate problems.
Yeah, it's like he knew that the human mind, even with the best tools, needs some strategies for dealing with information overload.
Yeah.
We have to, break things down, categorize, and create mental frameworks to make sense of it all.
He was really ahead of his time in recognizing that. And then, of course, there's this really intriguing concept of Vira his big vision for a universal mathematics that would essentially unlock the secrets of the universe.
Yeah, it was like he was searching for that master key, the underlying principles that govern everything, from how planets move to how our minds work.
Exactly. And what's so fascinating is that he believed even the most abstract concepts could be made easier to grasp through visualization,
Oh,
through finding like the simplest and most intuitive ways to represent these complex relationships.
so it's almost like he anticipated, the power of visual aids and infographics, like how a really good diagram can sometimes explain things better than pages and pages of text.
I think so. Yeah, it's all about finding those really elegant representations that make those complex ideas just click into place.
Absolutely. Now, we've spent a lot of time unpacking the brilliance of Descartes' ideas, but I think we also have to acknowledge some of the challenges that we encountered, right?
For sure.
His emphasis on these really clear-cut distinctions and, simple elements doesn't always capture the nuances and complexities of reality, especially when we're dealing with things like living organisms or those aspects of experience that we call spiritual.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that's where these alternative perspectives, like the ones offered by Leibniz and Kant, become so valuable. They remind us that reality is often a lot messier and more interconnected than Descartes' framework might suggest.
Yeah, they expand our toolkit in a way, giving us new ways to approach those parts of experience that resist being, neatly categorized or dissected. Like it's like we need a whole orchestra of philosophical instruments to really appreciate the symphony of existence.
That's beautifully put. And I think it's that spirit of embracing multiple perspectives, recognizing that no one system have all the answers, that I think Descartes, with his relentless curiosity and passion for truth, would have appreciated.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Descartes, what's that one big question, that thought-provoking nugget we want to leave our listeners with?
I think it comes down to this. If Descartes' method, with its focus on breaking things down into their simplest elements, struggles to really grasp those complexities of concrete wholes, especially in the realm of spiritual realities, what other approaches do we need to truly understand the world and our place in it?
Wow, what a fantastic question. And it's one that invites us to keep exploring, to remain open to new ideas and to remember that the pursuit of knowledge is a journey, not a destination.
Hmm.
So, to our listeners, as you continue to explore Descartes, ask yourself, are there things in your life like love or creativity that can't be reduced to these simple parts? How do you approach understanding those complex, beautiful wholes? And on that note, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into Descartes' rules for the direction of the mind. We'll see you next time.